Uh, we would like to make a short briefing on the status of the vice presidential race. And we have said earlier that Ms. Leni Robredo should now be called as the presumptive vice president-elect. In the same manner that President-elect Duterte is being referred to as the presumptive winner in the presidential race. Why? Because they were the votes canvassed for the two positions came from the very same sources. Ito ay nanggaling sa mga probinsya, sa mga cities. These were generated by the same vote counting machines, by the same electronic instruments which were used to electronically transfer or transmit the results of the election. In the canvass for President and Vice President, the House of Representatives and the Senate would be guided only by what we call the Certificate of Canvass. Ito ho ay yung Certificate of Canvass. Wala silang pakialam dun sa mga election returns and any other extrinsic matters. All they have to do is to see to it that the Certificate of Canvass in their possession are duly executed, they are genuine, and they have been duly signed by the members of the Board of Canvassers. Dalawang dokumento lang po yan, the Provincial Certificate of Canvass for the President as well as the Provincial Certificate of Canvass for the Vice President. Iisang envelope lang yan. They would be contained in the same envelope, and both documents will be signed by the same election officials who prepared the same Certificate of Canvass. During the canvass proceedings, hindi po pwede yung mag-a-allege ka ng fraud, hindi pwede mag-a-allege ka ng errors in the transmission, because in the case of the President and Vice President, there is no pre-proclamation controversies. In other words, you cannot raise any issue pertaining to the transmission or custody of the election returns or the election documents. The Board of Canvassers, the Senators, and the House of Representatives would only be guided by the Certificate of Canvass as canvassed by the Provincial Board of Canvassers and as delivered or transmitted to them by the respective Boards of Canvassers. Sa Board of Canvassers, itong Senate and the House of Representatives, they have in their possession 166 certificates of canvass coming from the provinces and from highly urbanized cities. Ito ang kanilang ika-canvass. Aside, of course, from the certificates of canvass coming from the overseas voters, from the local absentee voters, and also from the day-day voters. Now, we have what we call the Consolidated Certificate of Canvass at the COMELEC website. Ang COMELEC website, meron sila ng Consolidated COCs. In other words, the website of the COMELEC will show lahat nitong mga Certificate of Canvass which had already been transmitted to Congress had already been reflected in the COMELEC website. And based on the tabulation from the COMELEC website, Ms. Leni Robredo had obtained 14,322,666. I'll repeat that, 14,322,666 as against Mr. Marcos's 13,963,767, 13,963,767, or a vote lead of something like 388 votes. Now, from the overseas absentee voting, we had computed that Mr. Marcos would get 176,669 as against Ms. Robredo's 89,935. I repeat that, for the overseas absentee voters, Mr. Marcos obtained 176,669 and Ms. Robredo 89,935. That is our computation based on our records. And from the local absentee voters, Mr. Marcos got 11,683 as against Ms. Robredo's 2,341. 11,683 for Mr. Marcos and for Ms. Robredo, 2,341. For the detainee, we expected Mr. Marcos to obtain 607 votes, while Ms. Robredo would get 393 votes. Kaya kung i-add mo yan, if you would add all these votes from overseas, from local absentee voters, and from the detainees, Mr. Marcos would get a total of 14,152,726. I repeat that, 14,152,726 as against Ms. Robredo's 14,415,335. 14,415,335, or a difference of 262,609. 262,609 in favor of Ms. Robredo. Meron pang isang hindi natatali rito, not included in this tally, is the municipality of Rizal. Hindi na isama ito nung when the COC of Laguna was transmitted to the COMELEC. The municipality of Rizal's results were not transmitted, but it only involves 11,615 votes. I repeat that, for the municipality of Rizal, it only involves 11,615 votes. So much so that even if we credit all these votes in favor of Mr. Marcos, Ms. Robredo would still lead by 250,994. 250,994. So that's the picture now, why we claim and we say, and we are very, very confident that the victory of Ms. Robredo is now unassailable, and that she should also be referred to as the presumptive winner or the presumptive vice president. Now, in the case of Mr. Marcos, we have heard that he would be asking for a system audit of practically the entire system in the past election. This request of Mr. Marcos for a system audit clearly shows that he has no evidence. Wala siyang ebidensya. He has no evidence in his possession to prove that there were errors or there were irregularities in the past election that affected the votes for the vice president. Kasi kung meron siyang ebidensya, hindi siya hihingi ng system audit. Another thing is that if you ask for system audit, it means that you are only fishing for evidence. Mr. Marcos is only fishing for evidence. Wala siyang ibang ebidensya. And lastly, to ask for system audit, Mr. Marcos is practically asking the COMELEC to develop his case. Parang nasabi sa COMELEC, Mr. COMELEC, pakitulungan mo nga ako, pakidevelop mo nga ang case ko, pakibigyan mo nga ako ng ebidensya. That's not the way to develop your case. You have to you have to rely on the strength of your evidence and not on mere speculations or on the basis of asking the agency that will be deciding the case for the evidence for you. Kaya kami naniniwala na yung sinasabi lang mga system audit, ito ay papatibay na wala siyang hinahawakang anumang ebidensya. And so we expect that during the canvassing of his votes by the House of Representatives and by the Senate, there might be some debates insofar as the admission or the inclusion of the COCs in the canvass is concerned. But our legal team is prepared to meet all these arguments in the Board of Canvassers before the House of Representatives and the Senate of the Philippines. So ilang po ang status, that's the status of the vice presidential race, and why we say and we reiterate that Ms. Leni Robredo is the presumptive vice president-elect of our country. If you have any questions, we would be happy to answer your questions. May tanong mo ba kayo? Kung ano nung katanungan, tingnan ho natin kung mabibigyan natin sapat na kasagutan. Yes, sir. I don't know how Mr. Marcos will do that. It's Mr. Marcos who is asking for a system audit. But for me, if you ask for a system audit, that should be after the proclamation. For our position is that if you have any question regarding the procedural matters or any matter outside the certificate of canvass, that should be brought before the Presidential Electoral Tribunal in an election protest. In other words, kailangan mo naman proclaim si Ms. Robredo bago natin pag-usapan yung mga system audit na yan. Because system audit will now require presentation of evidence. And during the canvass of the certificates of canvass by the House and the Senate, hindi ho hinihingan dyan ng ebidensya. Ang pinag-uusapan lang dyan ay yung bang hawak nilang certificate of canvass ay genuine or duly executed. Kapag nagka-canvass po kasi ang House at saka ang Senate, hindi yan katulad sa korte na kailangan mag-present ng evidence ang mga parties. Hindi yan katulad sa korte na yung halimbawa si Mr. Marcos, magpipresenta pa siya ng ebidensya para patunayan na tama yung COC. Hindi yan po pwede na kami magpipresenta ng ebidensya para patunayan na mali yung sinasabi niya. The function of the Senate and the House of Representatives during the canvass proceeding is merely ministerial. In other words, there are already a set of rules which must be followed by the members of the Board of Canvassers. Ano yung mga rules na yun? Titingnan lang nila kung yung certificate of canvass was signed by the Board of Canvassers concerned. Was it duly executed? Yung ba ay properly transmitted to the House and to the Senate? If it complies with all these requirements, then hindi ka pwede mag-present ng anumang ebidensya. For Mr. Marcos to contest a particular certificate of canvass, dapat magpakita siya ng sarili niyang certificate of canvass. He has to show his own authentic copy of the certificate of canvass. Kailangan patunayan niya yung kanyang certificate of canvass ay iba kaysa dun sa certificate of canvass which is being canvassed by the Board of Canvassers or by the Senate or the House of Representatives. That is how to challenge a certificate of canvass. Alam nyo, at saka yung sa election returns, kung sinasabi niya bakit ang transparency server iba ang resulta, if you want to question the results in the transparency server, Mr. Marcos has to present his own copy of the election returns. He has to prove that his copy of his election returns do not tally with the copies of the PPCRB or in the transparency server. Kasi under the rules, under the law, Republic Act 9369, there are 30 copies of the election returns generated by the vote counting machines, which means that all the political parties and all the candidates were given the chance to have their own copy of the said election returns. Imagine 30 kopya yan. And the rule even states that there would be additional 30 copies of these election returns if so requested by any interested political party or by any interested candidate. In other words, there are about 60 copies of the election returns. So if Mr. Marcos would like to contest a particular election return or a particular result in a clustered precinct, all he has to do is present his own copy of the election returns and tell the board that the election returns from this particular precinct does not tally with the returns as canvassed by the board. Yung mga certificates of canvass naman, under the law, there are 14 copies of the certificates of canvass given to all candidates and all political parties. Aside from that, any interested candidate or any interested political party has the right under the law to request for a copy of the certificate of canvass. Refusal to issue a certificate of canvass is an election offense. In other words, the Board of Canvassers cannot refuse any request for a copy of the certificate of canvass. Now, given that right, I am sure that Mr. Marcos has in his possession copies of the certificates of canvass. Now, if he wants to question any certificate of canvass, if he wants to allege errors in the transmission, all he has to do is present his own certificate of canvass before the board, tell the board na ito ho ang aking certificate of canvass, iba kaysa doon certificate of canvass being canvassed by the Senate and the House. That is a challenge we would like to hurl to Mr. Marcos. Kailangan lang sabihin niya, ito ang aking certificate of canvass, hindi nagtatali doon sa certificate of canvass being canvassed by the Board of Canvassers. Until and unless he could present an authentic copy of a certificate of canvass or any copy of the election returns which does not tally with the certificates of canvass being canvassed by the Board of Canvassers, the Board of Canvassers, the Senate, and the House has no recourse but to admit and include all the COCs in their possession. And eventually, with the admission of all the certificate of canvass, that will lead to the proclamation of the President and the Vice President. You know, the certificates of canvass, as I said, these are all contained in one envelope, prepared by the same officials. Hindi naman po pwede na yung certificate of canvass lang ng President ang valid and the certificate of canvass for the Vice President is invalid. Kaya I don't think there will be strong objections or arguments against the COCs now in the possession of the Senate and the House for purposes of canvass proceedings. Next question, please. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yung sinasabing appreciated, yan ay pinag-uusapan after proclamation. In other words, if Mr. Marcos is now talking about appreciating, that is already an admission that he is now ready to accept the proclamation of Ms. Leni Robredo. Because by the proclamation of Ms. Leni Robredo, pwede na siyang mag-file ng election protest. And in the election protest, which he could institute before the Presidential Electoral Tribunal, doon siya po pwedeng maghain ng kanyang mga reklamo tungkol sa appreciating. Yung overvotes or undervotes, nangyayari talaga yan. No? Nangyayari yan. Overvotes ay yung sinasabi na bakit mas marami yung bumoto pero kulang ang kanilang boto. Eh kasi yung iba hindi bumoboto ng Vice President. Nag-a-abstain sila. And it has already been decided that not only by the Supreme Court, by the COMELEC, in the case of Matay versus Castelo, sinabi ng COMELEC na it is not unnatural for some voters not to vote for a particular position. Kaya meron tinatawag dyan mga undervotes o hindi nagtatali yung actual number of voters with the number of votes obtained by the candidates. So, no problem po yan. At saka isa pa, yung ganyang mga arguments that could not be brought before the Board of Canvassers. Yes, kahit na magdala sila ng 1,000 na witnesses doon sa Congress, unang-una, hindi papayagan yun. The board will never allow testimonial evidence during the canvass. The board will never allow the presentation of evidence pertaining to preceding or conduct of the election. Because as I said, the board is only guided by the certificate of canvass in their possession. Ang pag-uusapan lang doon, tama ba? Ito ba ay duly prepared by the members of the Board of Canvassers? As to other extraneous matters, as to evidences of alleged fraud or irregularities, that would already be in the realm of an election protest, which could only be instituted or be presented at the Presidential Electoral Tribunal. Okay na po ba? Okay, maliwanag po ba? Okay, so maraming po salamat. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat.